Haggai 2:20-23, we can see that God gave a word to Haggai to give to King Zerubbabel. And in summary, God told Haggai to tell the king that I, God, chose you. I chose you to defeat evil, and I chose you to conquer your enemies. And I promise that any army that comes against you will be defeated by your hand. And any evil that comes to this nation will also be defeated. Haggai reminds King Zerubbabel about what he did with Moses when he took his people out of Egypt, and what he did against Pharaoh. That he showed the victory that he gave Moses with his people against Pharaoh. Also, God said that he will fulfill his promise that he made to David, that a king from his bloodline will be the one that will be running the New Jerusalem. But that all depends on Zerubbabel if he decides to follow what God is trying to tell him, or he decides to back down or back away from what God is trying to tell him through Haggai. And that also depends if he wants to or not. So the book ends with a bright future hanging in the distance if King Zerubbabel is going to keep following God's direction and leading that generation of his people to keep following God, or he's going to back away, how some of the people from the desert with Moses did, that they backed away and stopped believing in Christ. So will this generation be the generation that will get closer to God, or will this generation be the generation that will be pushing God away? And that's the question at the end of this chapter of this book. You might be thinking, man, so how does this affect me? What does this have to do with me? Well, if we really think about it, we are somewhat in the same situation as King Zerubbabel and his people. After all this COVID stuff hit us, and after all this situation that has happened with us, this is a generation that little by little is straying away from God. But you have the opportunity to make that change. And just like the last video that we did in this series, it all depends on you. It all depends on what you want to come out in this generation. What do you want to come out in this situation? Do you want to come out being the generation that stay faithful to God throughout COVID, stay faithful to God throughout all circumstances that this world is throwing at us? Or do you want to be the generation that backs down a little bit and starts straying away from God little by little because the world is telling us that that is perfectly fine to do? I'm not trying to attack. I'm not trying to, throw shots at anybody. I'm just trying to open up my heart and what I'm seeing, and trying to open up y'all's eyes. As a generation that is coming up, as a generation that is going to face the circumstances of their choices today, they might not see it in the next year or two, but they're going to start seeing it in the next couple of years. And by the time you have kids, you're going to start seeing the mistakes that your generation made all together. Or you might see the blessings of what your generation made all together. But it all depends on what you decide to do today. Is this going to be the generation that's going to be focusing on God? Or is this going to be the generation that throws them in the backseat? You decide.